Welcome back to Zag Talk with Dylan, Carson, and me, Mary. We are here in our 10th or 12th week of the season, still undefeated, and we now have our first slate of scheduling cancellations on our end that opened up some openings this weekend. Carson will give a quick overview of that, and then with the lack of content to go into for our Pacific and BYU games this weekend, we've decided to do somewhat of a mailbag episode. I listed some questions from some of our friends. We're going to answer those questions here on the podcast. I'll hand it over to Carson to do some scheduling conversations.
Yeah, so we had a wild week of scheduling or attempts to schedule this week. It started with our Santa Clara game being canceled, so knowing we were going to have our Saturday open this week, and then followed closely by the LMU game getting canceled. So we had a full week open, and obviously everyone's mind started running to, is Baylor going to be open? Is there a way to work that out? Which just really was nothing there since neither of their games got canceled. And then the big one, we saw Houston had an opening on Saturday, so we thought that was a possibility. And then some other ones with Tennessee and Villanova ended up potentially being open at a time. But as we found out, Houston, we were deep in talks with them. It seemed like we were ready to go, and last minute got called off. And then with Villanova, same thing. It looked like it was going to happen. And then, they had a priority for Big East games, which, that one was a bummer. Can't fault them, though. I mean, they played 6 games in the Big East this year. So I get that one. Tennessee didn't work out because Kentucky ended up not being on pause. But Houston, this one is it's mind-boggling to me because if it really came down to, Calvin Sampson said that it was that they didn't want to travel away 3 times in a span of however many games. They played at East Carolina last night. Then they would fly to Salt Lake City to play us. And then they would go to Central Florida early next week. But the thing for me, though, if that was the deal breaker, why did we get so far into talks? Like, that couldn't have been the deal breaker there. And then they go ahead and schedule Sisters of the Poor or Our Lady of the Lake, whatever they are, NAIA Division I school, who has had a losing record the last 3 or 4 years, are 1-3 this year. And they didn't even need to schedule a game. They had an open. They had a bye week or a bye day on Saturday. They weren't supposed to play this weekend. So it's almost like they got all worked up that they backed out of our game and then scheduled Our Lady of the Lake and then proceeded to lose to East Carolina, who has not won a game since December 22nd, 29th. So a terrible loss. They just lost their 1 seed. And it really doesn't make sense to me, their logic or their reasoning that they said behind not wanting to travel. Like, I don't know how our conversation got that deep if that was the deal breaker for them in the first place. So now we got Pacific tonight and we got BYU on Monday. So at least we don't have a week without games, which would be a big bummer just with how good this team is, not being able to watch them play. So we got games. It leaves some space open in our schedule the last week of the season, or maybe to move stuff around over the next couple weeks. I really think it's going to be tough to find somebody to play non-conference at this point, but you never know. Villanova might want a chance. Houston might want a chance to go get their 1 line or 2 line back. So who knows?
Yeah, I'd love to see, if it happened again and us and Baylor were both open, I'd love to see that come together, considering that was supposed to be on the schedule. I think that'd be a great game to pick up. Otherwise, we coasted out the rest of the way. I don't have any complaints. I think we talked about this on a previous podcast. Is it worth it to go play 20, 25 ranked team? Probably not. If we can, continue to have games as long as we don't have too big of a break. So love to see a Baylor game. Also, I second the idea that a Baylor-Gonzaga national championship undefeated game for all the marbles would be pretty cool too.
Yeah, I think I've now officially moved over to the side of I don't want that game to happen until the first week of April. I mean, earlier in the year, I really wanted to see him play, but at this point, I feel like there's just so much drama built up now and so much conversation that's just kind of driving this season, because there's not really a whole lot of other topics that are super entertaining this year. So I think, I mean, if both teams can get there without a loss or even one loss, if Baylor can't get through the rest of their regular season, which I think they will, honestly, at this point. But I would love to see an undefeated Final Four or national championship matchup.
Yeah, that would be obviously, one of the all-time great matchups. The thing that comes to my mind with these scheduling changes, though, is that moving the Pacific and BYU games up, assuming that we can't maybe reschedule with the teams that we had originally on the calendar, I think this just gives Mark Few a little bit more time maybe to be a little bit strategic and figure out who we can throw in there. Or, hey, look, we have, about a week break, 10-day break between our last game and the start of the WCC tournament, which, isn't necessarily the worst thing. Gives us kind of a lot of time to tune up on areas for improvement and things like that. So I don't know. I really wish we would have gotten like Villanova this week. That would have been really, really fun. But either way, I'm hoping that we are able to schedule games in the very last week of the season now, moving these games up. So
yeah, and I think that could end up being, I don't know what the other LMU and Santa Clara's schedules look like that last week. I don't know how that all works out, but with half the league being on pause this week, and maybe some into next week, that there could be some jumbling around there to where we could just end up playing LMU and Santa Clara in that last week. It opens up the likelihood and the possibility that we will be playing at home in our last game of the regular season to potentially cap off an undefeated season, which would be cool. Obviously, it would be cooler if we had fans there this year, but either way, I think it'll all work out. I really don't think we'll be sitting idle for the last week of the regular season, especially with the chance that, the WCC tournament, I think it will happen, but if for some reason it didn't happen, and even if it does, we play 2 games max and then sit out for another week. So, I mean, you'd be looking at 2 games over a 3-week span going into the tournament, which they probably want to try to avoid as much as possible. But we'll see. It gives them some flexibility, and I guess we'll just see where we go from here. It just seems a little more tough to, dial up these quick games in the middle of the conference schedule. So, all right. So with that, let's hop into some of these questions. We had some followers, send us in some questions, send us some DMs. We had some friends of the podcast text in some questions. So we got some really good ones here that we're excited to go through, that they really range from serious questions about the season to just some wild speculative questions that would never happen, but we're going to work our way through them. So first question we had was from L-Town Zag on Twitter, and it was asking for our all-time defensive starting 5 for Gonzaga. So I think for most of us, I think it's going to be a little bit of a recency bias here, but at the same time, we know Gonzaga's defensive teams have been a lot better in the recent past rather than, back to the 2000s where we had some Ken Palm rankings in the hundreds for defense. So mine, I'm going with Nigel Williams-Goss as one of my guards. He was 4th in the country in Evan Mia's defensive BPR in the 16-17 season, and in the highest ever at Gonzaga in his database. Then I'm going to go with Silas Melson. He's doesn't rank super well individual seasons on there, but as we heard with Gino Crandall, one of the toughest guys to play against, and we've seen just, watching him on court. Tough guy to go against, super lengthy and athletic. Then I'm going to go Jordan Matthews in that 16-17 season. He had a really good year defensively, just really solid. Not a lot of weak points for him. And then my 2 bigs, I'm going to go with Jonathan Williams and Brandon Clark. Jonathan Williams is just a beast. He's got a motor. And then obviously we know Brandon Clark, the ultimate rim protector. So that's mine. I got Nigel, Silas, Jordan Matthews, Brandon Clark, and J3.
I think my all-time defensive starting 5 At the guard spots, I got Jordan Matthews and Gary Bell Jr. Gary Bell known as coming in as a defender and kind of teaching some of the guys younger than him. I know Silas has mentioned him as a guy that he got a lot of learnings from. He's come back to the program, and I'm sure has helped them defensively over the last 2 years or so. Those are my guards. My two forwards, Mike Hart, who is known as the defensive guy, the hustle guy. So that's really my oldest player on the team, or going back the farthest, although I think we had a couple names thrown around from guys a little bit older that could be on this list. And then Brandon Clark, there's not much to say there. You hit the nail on the head, the ultimate rim protector. And I'm actually going to go with Zach Collins as my fifth. My theory there of just being, his one season, he averaged 1.8 blocks per game over 17 minutes. That's pretty damn impressive, spread out over 30 minutes or anything like that. So I think I'm going to have to go with Zach Collins. Would have loved to see him play another season at GU. I think he would have put up absolutely massive defensive numbers as a starting forward or center his following year or second year.
Yeah, my roster is very similar to yours, Dylan. So I've got Gary Bell, Jordan Matthews, and Mike Hart at the 3. I feel like Mike Hart's good in the 3 spot just because he's obviously one of the best glue guys in the history of college basketball, and he can guard in the post, but he could also guard equally well in the perimeter. Carson and I played against him, and yeah, man, that guy that guy can defend for sure. And then I've actually got Brandon Clark at the 4, and then Shemek at the 5. And I just think I put Shemek in there because there's really never been an inside presence like him. Every time anyone drove, it was like running into a brick wall. And I think that his presence inside is something that we may never see again, because at this point, the prototypical big is turning into more of like the Brandon Clark or the Zach Collins. So I just think that his presence inside was so incredibly effective. And so that's why I put him in there in the 5th spot.
Which of those 3 teams do you think is would be the best overall team when you throw in the offensive side of it too?
I think yours probably, Carson, just because Nigel is a big time. I mean, he's a game manager. And so I think he would do a better job managing the team on offense. That'd be my big thing. I think that your team is probably better set up for offense. And then also, Mike Hart, got to give him a lot of credit. Like he did so many things, so many intangibles. He did so many things really well, but scoring was not one of his strong suits. So having like a non-scorer in there, it probably doesn't help Dylan or I's cause.
Yeah, I'd second that. I'd probably go with Carson's as well. Cool. Next question. We got this one in a couple different forms from a couple different people. So I'm going to stitch together the 2. So from Tavin Jensen and Sam Schrader, Tavin asked, are you worried about Suggs turnovers and early foul trouble as we get into March? Sam, kind of along the same lines, asked the same thing about foul trouble. And then in addition to that, is this a product of WCC reffing? Is this him being too aggressive and having the reputation as a football player? And, is it something else? And more generally, do you think this is something he can adapt to refs calling tighter games as we get later in the season? I'm going to start it off. I think the turnover issue, I'm not worried about. I think we have enough other game managers, guards that can handle the ball that I'm not worried about if he gets into turnover issues, us being able to call upon somebody else to handle the ball, bring the ball up, do whatever. As far as the foul trouble, it's a little more concerning. I like Sam's thought in that is it a part of him being a football player and having that reputation as a 2-sport athlete? I don't think it's a reputation piece necessarily, but I do think it's part of the way that he's programmed to play sports, period. And I do think he plays pretty aggressive and he plays downhill. And I think that gets him into some trouble on both offense and defense. I do have confidence that by the time we get to March, these will both be things that he can hopefully get more adjusted to both refs calling a tighter game and hopefully turning down some of the turnover issues a little bit. Although I think he's shown improvement in the turnover category in general over the last couple weeks of the season. So I would say in general, I would not be too worried about this.
Yeah, agreed. I think that it's the nature of how he plays. He's an aggressive basketball player, and I think that is definitely to the team's benefit. There's nothing really that concerns me about that. I don't know if it's a product of the officiating in the WCC per se, just because I don't know. I think all around the country we're seeing kind of some wacky and weird calls here and there. Lots of weird charges. And I also think maybe the early foul trouble issue could be a little bit overblown, to be honest. Outside of Pepperdine when he fouled out, USF when he fouled out, and Auburn where he had 4 fouls. He's been in the 2 to 3 foul range, so it's really that's not really a concern for me.
Yeah, so I actually went through and looked at when he picked up his second foul in each of the games so far this year to try to compare between non-conference and conference play, and then also some of our bigger games, like some of our quad one games. And it does seem a correlation between him getting in foul trouble earlier in conference games than out of conference games. And he actually stays out of foul trouble a bit more in the bigger games than some of the not as competitive games. So on average for the season, he's picking up his second foul with about a minute left in the first half. In non-conference games, he wasn't picking up his second foul until 18:50 left in the second half. So a couple minutes better there. And then in what I called big non-conference games, so, Kansas, Auburn, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, he was picking them up at around the same amount, 18:50. But in Q1 games, he's not picking up that second foul until about, on average, the 16-minute mark in the second half. But in conference, he's picking it up at 2 minutes and 43 seconds in the first half. So we're looking at over a few minutes difference. You look at how many fouls he's averaging just on between conference and those non-conference games. He's averaging a little over 3 fouls per game in conference games and only 2 in non-conference games. These are personal fouls. I'm taking out the dumb technical fouls. But he's averaging over a full foul more per game in conference. So I think it is a little bit of WCC refs. I think it's a combination of them not being the greatest, and then also, when you're playing against some lesser athletes and he's such a freak of nature athletically, you're going to get yourself in some of those situations where you are plowing someone over, and it doesn't help that we're in the middle of this charge epidemic in college basketball reffing. So I think he's shown promise too. His last few games outside of the Pepperdine game, he had 1 foul against Pacific. He had 2 fouls against USD, with the second one not coming until the second half. 3 fouls against St. Mary's. He didn't pick up the third until late in the second half. So I think he's doing better. You look at the Pepperdine game that he fouled out in, and he's playing against Colby Ross, who's really good at drawing fouls, and the refs in that game for sure were on some sort of crack, because that was just terrible. So I'm not super concerned. It does seem like that he is adjusting a little bit, although it's taken a bit to get there. And I think he's going to be just fine when we get to the tournament and we're playing against the more physical. And I think the more physical the game is, you watch West Virginia games, fewer fouls are actually called, because there's so many fouls happening that they're not going to get every single one. So I think it bodes well for him as we get into tournament play, and this is just only helping him kind of pick and choose his spots a little bit better.
I think you can also in non-conference, especially early in these games, you can overcommit a little bit more on defense too. You can play down court, go for steals, because you're going to be able to get out and push the ball. You have a little more flexibility with the score, and in those tight games, in those we'll say Q1 games, you don't have as much of that leisure to be able to do that, because you can't overcommit, because teams are much more likely to take advantage of you in probably a much closer game.
Yeah, and my thought too is, any basketball player or any athlete, that when the big games are going on, you're kind of in a zone. You're in a zone, and your body just kind of knows what to do and just gets after it. And I think there's probably a little bit of a chance that for the WCC teams we're playing, they're coming in and playing the number one team in the country, and those players are in that zone. And there's a chance that maybe once we're up 20, 25 points with a minute left in the first half, they're maybe, going super hard, making basketball plays while we're maybe either thinking too much or just not in that zone. And I think that can lead to some issues. And I think you also see it in his body language too. Like when he picks up those dumb fouls or when he has those dumb turnovers, he doesn't get down on himself, but he knows like, that's another stupid mistake I made. But I don't really remember him, other than the West Virginia game when he got injured. I don't really remember him doing that in those really, really big games early in the season. So, I don't know. Remains to be seen. I'm optimistic for March, and I think that Jalen Suggs is going to show up in a big way.
Yeah, and I guess I never answered the turnover part of it, but I kind of echo what you guys were saying. I don't think it's a huge problem. He's a freshman who is a playmaker and a play creator, and he's super aggressive. So he's going to get himself in those situations. But like, look at the Iowa game. He had 7 turnovers, but he also carried us offensively that game. So if that's the trade-off on a team that's not super turnover prone in general, I'm not super concerned. The other thing I just noticed from going through the numbers with his fouls is he's had a couple times where, I think it seems like this happens more often than it does, but in the USF game and the second Pepperdine game, where he picked up 2 fouls in less than a minute, in USF, he picked up a foul at 8:54 in the first half, and then 8:21, he picked up his 3rd foul. And then against Pepperdine last week, he had 2 fouls in the span of 6 seconds in the second half. So those are the ones that really hurt. But looking at the numbers, it doesn't really seem to be tail of the tape at all. So,
all right, next question also comes from Tavin. Outside of the projected number 1 seeds, so we are excluding Gonzaga, Baylor, and Villanova. I think kind of remains to be seen if Villanova is going to be a number 1 seed, but that's who Tavin called out here. Who is the one team you do not want to see on the road to the Final Four? My answer here, I actually have 2 teams that I would not want to see. I would not want to see Texas, and I would not want to see West Virginia again. I would not want to see West Virginia just because they'd be out for blood. I know they don't have Tshiebwe anymore, which would probably make it a little tougher on them. They have less depth in the front court at that point. But Texas is just super, super long and athletic. And the fact that they were up on Baylor in the middle of the second half when they recently played, I think just shows that they can go toe-to-toe with anyone. And if they had sustained a full game and not allowed Baylor back in and letting him go on like a 16-2 run or whatever it was, they come away with a victory against one of the top 2 teams in the country. So yeah, Texas would be my answer. They're definitely the team that I do not want to see on the road to the Final Four.
Yeah, so I actually had West Virginia and Texas kind of on my short list. West Virginia was kind of, I know they lost to Tshiebwe, but they did kind of control, I don't know if I want to say the pace, but they kind of controlled the physicality of the game for a lot of that. And I know Jalen got hurt and that kind of changed some stuff. But even when he was in there in the first half, we kind of struggled, and, tough to beat a team twice, even tougher to beat a team 3 times. But yeah, I don't know what it is about them. I just feel like it would be a really ugly game. And I think we win 8 or 9 times out of 10, but I just wouldn't want to see them. The other one I have, I'll give 2, because one, Michigan, I think before they went on this extended pause, I've kind of the whole time, thought maybe they're Q1 or not Q1, tier 1, but, I kind of had them in that second group with Villanova and Texas and stuff like that. But I just, with their big guy, the freshman big guy, I don't remember his name, but someone like that who's super, super physical and big inside worries me a little bit, because not that I don't think Timmy can handle him, because I think he can, but like for a full game, if there's any sort of foul trouble and he picks up a quick one or two, like I think we would really struggle guarding that. I mean, Watson's shown he can do a decent job against like someone like Garza. I don't really trust Ballo to go in and give great minutes defensively. And then the other team, kind of same story, would be Illinois, because of Coburn, I think, could give us some issues. And then they obviously have, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name. I'll leave that for Dylan's butcher block. But I mean, yeah, they've been a disappointment this year a little bit, but they seem to be finding their way a little bit, and just any solid inside game that they have a couple guys that can go at you and could potentially get us in foul trouble worries me a little bit. But like we've said kind of all year, I'm not super worried about any team outside of Baylor. I wouldn't be scared or worried really about any team outside of Baylor.
I am going to – Texas was my big one, the big name. I agree with B-Mary on that one. Michigan, I think, has probably the most balanced of those teams, especially if you want to take into consideration before pause. So I think those are the two big ones. My dark horse, wasn't expecting Carson to say it, but Illinois was my third team that I do not want to see. I think mostly because of Kofi. I think he's really, he's a giant 7-footer. He can absolutely dominate in the post. That's any team that has that type of player scares me probably more than most other teams. I will go ahead and attempt to pronounce it. Ayo Dosunmu, Donsmu. I don't know.
Is that
what?
Is it Dosunmu? I feel like I've heard that, so that's why.
I think it's Dosunmu. Ayo Dosunmu.
Ayo Dosunmu. Okay, perfect. So him as well. Great offensive player. I think we have enough guys to throw at him. The other team I will throw out an honorable mention to, only as I think about kind of just well-balanced team with some pretty damn good players. I'm going to go Tennessee as well. They've got another couple of good guys that I would not want to go up against. And a couple of guys in Evan Mia's top 100 for BPN. So I'm going to go, or BPR. So I'm going to go with Tennessee as my dark horse.
All right, on to the next question. This one's a fun one. If you were stranded on a desert island with one Gonzaga player, who would it be and why? This one comes to us again from Tavin. Thank you for the questions.
Before you answer, are we going current like 2020, 2021 roster, or are we going Zag?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It is this year's roster.
Okay, cool.
So I think there are two guys I was thinking about, but I think overall I would have to go with Drew Timme, just because I think the entertainment value of that would be pretty fun. I feel like you could have some wild conversations with that guy, and you'd keep the mood pretty light, even though you'd be stranded out on a desert island. So that's my pick.
I think for pretty much the same reasons, but also just because he seems like a pretty cool dude that I'd want to hang out with. I think I'd have to go with Corey Kispert.
That was my second option there that I was trying to decide between.
I'm going with Timme myself, for a few reasons, more than he would just be a blast to be around. But I mean, he's tall. He could maybe grab some coconuts off some trees. He's from Texas. He's got maybe some ranching experience. He could, round up some chickens or something on the island. I don't know. I feel like we'd be in better shape, livelihood wise as well, in his presence. So that's why I'm picking him.
I would love to see Drew Timme trying to round up some chickens. That's a long way from the ground for him to reach down and grab them. I'll give my honorable mention goes to Joel Ayayi, because I think the multilingual facet of his game would be helpful. You don't know what island you're going to be on, but he knows a lot more languages than I do, so he might be able to communicate a little bit better if we end up on some like French or Spanish island or something.
Next question comes to us courtesy of Will White. How do you think Gonzaga would finish in the WCC if every other team was given a 40-point handicap lead, as in the game starts and Portland is already up by 40? So we're coming back from a 40-point deficit to start the game. How do I think I think for this one, I honestly think we would still, there's teams in the WCC I still think we would potentially blow out, because you're going to play your starter. Well, blowout might be a tough one, but you're still winning a vast majority of those games. I think with the ability for our starters to absolutely dominate pretty much every team in the WCC, except with the exception of BYU, San Francisco, and kind of St. Mary's, I think they win most of those other games. You see it in their 20-3 runs to start games. You see it in their first 25 points scored. You leave those guys on the court for almost the entirety of a WCC game, they're going to come back from a lot of 40-point deficits, especially 40 points to start the game. 25 points at halftime, 40 points at halftime, that's a whole different thing, but you got a lot of time to make up 40 points, and I'm going with the Zags in almost every one of those games.
I think for me, we'd probably finish middle of the pack in the WCC. And the reason why I say that is because knowing you're up 40 points changes the way that your team plays as well. Any offensive rebound, you aren't trying to put that thing back up. You are kicking that out and spending another 20, 30 seconds out on the perimeter. You would probably play a lot slower, which usually doesn't play to Gonzaga's strengths. The game that I am reminded of that kind of reminds me of the way that teams would probably play us in those situations is the Northern Arizona game. And we did beat them by 30. And yes, we put in a lot of bench players late in the second half, but with a team that's a little bit more talented, like a BYU or like a St. Mary's, you probably have a situation where they're not scoring 58 points, they're scoring 60 or 70, just because there's a little bit more firepower there. So I would say that we'd probably win. I don't know. We might make it to 500, maybe a little bit better than that. But I don't think that we would be like top of the heap myself.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. I had us down, I'd say about 500, maybe slightly better. I think against teams like against Portland and USD and Pacific, obviously we beat them by 40 something this year. But I think against teams like that, we could have a chance. Obviously we'd have to play really well. And like you said, with the pace, I just think with some of the good teams, like St. Mary's does this against us anyways. I'm looking at our last game against them. We had 67 possessions. So you're looking at making a 40-point deficit in only 60-some possessions is pretty tough. Offensively, I think we could, get that number up there quite a bit. But defensively, getting those stops, and those teams are just going to be trying to use the full 30-second shot clock every time. It probably helps us that we'd come out with a sense of urgency against some of those bottom of the league teams. But yeah, I don't think we're beating BYU. I don't think we're beating St. Mary's. San Francisco, probably not. And then, yeah, the rest is kind of a toss-up. I think we get some of them, but we probably split with most of those teams, or maybe don't get in on some of them. So it'd be wild to see. Put it at 20, and I think we still have a really good shot at winning a lot of games.
Yeah, that's a fun question. I like that question a lot. 40 is a lot. 30 probably closer. 20, now you're talking they'd still maintain that first spot. So yeah, I think we're kind of all in agreement there. All right, next question. Where would the bench lineup finish in the WCC this year? And this question comes from Jerry Minigan. First, and if we're thinking about our 6 through 10, we'd be looking at Andrew Nemhard, Cook, Dom, Julian Strother, and Umar Bala. So I just think that, top to bottom in this lineup, like Nemhard still would probably be maybe the second best point guard in the WCC behind Colby Ross. Cook, still an amazing defender. Dom would probably be more of a scoring threat. It would scare me that he'd be a little bit more streaky than maybe a Jalen Suggs. And then Julian Strother, I mean, I think he has he would have had the ability to start this year and really contribute if we maybe didn't have Anton Watson, for example. But it's just the nature of the team this year. I mean, he should be getting starters minutes. He's the ninth guy off the bench. And then Omar Ballo, he'd just be a big presence. And I know that we're a little bit spoiled because we've got Drew Timme, and he's maybe the team's third best player, but he's also on the John Wooden Award list, right? So I think we're a little bit spoiled in that regard. And Omar Ballo, if he were to start, he would get a lot more game experience. He'd be a really, really great player, I think, in the WCC. I mean, he could potentially be the WCC Player of the Year. At this point, he's shooting 64.5%, which is outstanding and exactly what you need from a big like him. And so, yeah, this team would still do amazing against the WCC. I still think they would come in first. Some games would be a lot closer, but end of the day, they win them. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think the starting lineup would do pretty well. I think maybe against a BYU size-wise, if you're looking at BYU's roster at the beginning of this year before some of the injuries, we might struggle there a little bit, especially in terms of depth. I guess depth for the whole lineup, but I mean, you're taking 5 guys away from the team, so kind of tough there. But yeah, I mean, Nembhard, you're probably looking at potential player of the year in WCC. Cook and Dom, could be defensive player of the year. And if they're getting extended minutes. Strother, we've seen what he can do on the international stage in terms of filling it up. And I think, like you said, with Dom and Julian and Ballo, the developmental minutes that they would get starting and playing 20 plus 30 minutes a game, their development would go into hyper speed. So yeah, I mean, I think it'd be probably what the WCC was when Dylan and I were freshmen or sophomore. It's not a given. We probably drop 1 or 2 to St. Mary's or BYU, but I think we could easily win. Not easily, but I think we could definitely win the conference regular season with that lineup if we're ignoring the bench and depth issues.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the bench question. If you're replacing, those 5, so our first 5 off the bench in that scenario are not the next 5 on our current roster, and they're maybe a little bit better versions of those guys. I think BYU is probably the team, I think, just from a size perspective and a depth perspective, especially barring the injuries they've had this year, would definitely give them fits. Otherwise, yeah, I don't see a lot of other teams competing. It's a depth thing. I think that's what makes each of those guys so good, is that they're able to come off the bench for a team like Gonzaga and go at guys that are probably a little bit gassed, because a lot of other teams don't have the depth that we have. So I think that's given them a bit of a leg up this year. And I would be interested to see how those guys would do playing a vast majority of minutes in a game. But I do think wins and losses wise, you're looking at a first place finish in the WCC with probably 2 losses.
When you look at it too, just in terms of depth of starting lineup, the talent there, what other team in the WCC has a 5-star point guard, 2 4-star wings? I don't know, was Ballo a 4-star? I think, right? I mean, all of them are top 100 recruits except for probably Aaron Cook. So, I mean, how many teams in the WCC have that? Not a lot. So I think BYU probably has 2 right now with Caleb Lohner, and Harms was, I assume, a top 100 guy when he went to Purdue. So, yeah, it's nuts. All right, next question, another fun one. This one's from Will White. Can a team of only Omar Ballo, LeBron James, and Jalen Suggs make the NCAA tournament or win a conference? We had a conversation about this in the text. My first gut reaction, I think I probably overreacted by being I think they could. just because LeBron, I think legitimately would probably average 55 plus a game and probably 20 plus rebounds and who knows with assists with only two other guys. But like he would destroy, if we're talking mid-major, low-major conference, like I don't know if anyone could stop him. But three guys is tough. We talked about Colin Sexton back a couple of years ago when they were playing Minnesota and they had foul trouble and then the whole bench got ejected for coming onto the court. And so he finished the game with only two other guys and like went off and came back from, what was it, like?
They were down 11 with 10 to go, and they got it to 3 with over a minute to go.
Yeah.
And Sexton had 40 in that game.
Yeah, so like we could see, and you're talking about Colin Sexton compared to LeBron James. So yeah, probably they would win a couple games like that. But I mean, to go through a full season with no subs, if someone fouls out, you're absolutely screwed. I said in the comments, give me fill out the rest of the lineup with like end to bench guys or walk-ons, and I'll take LeBron and Jalen Suggs with a big guy Ballo like in the post against like pretty much any low major team, and they probably finished decent in the WCC.
Yeah, I think you throw that 3-man lineup out against a low major team, you're going to win a good amount of games, but just the amount of minutes you would need to put in playing 40 minutes a game over an entire non-COVID season where games aren't canceled, that's going to be pretty damn tough. But yeah, honestly, you throw out like Will Graves and Arlovskis with that lineup, and you're winning a low major conference.
This is a hot take. I think that team of three guys, if they figured out how to play defense, they would be able to win probably the bottom half of conferences in the country. And the reason I say that is because I'm looking at the RPI rankings by conference right now. And I think we're maybe forgetting how poor some of these conferences really are. The worst conference in the country that's actually playing, because the Ivy League isn't playing. The worst conference in the country is the MEAC. And the number one team in the MEAC right now is Morgan State. Right. And I'm just looking at some of these teams that are at the very top of their conferences. And none of these teams have ever really maybe won a game, but never really competed in the NCAA tournament. I'm talking about Northeastern is the number one team in the CAA, and they're 8-6 this year, right? Cleveland State in the Horizon League, UCSB in the Big West, Eastern Kentucky in the Ohio Valley Conference. Eastern Washington is 6-6 this year, and they're the best team in the Big Sky Conference. I think maybe we're forgetting sometimes that some of these conferences are really bad, and especially like the bottom 5 teams in each of those conferences is really not good. And a LeBron James, arguably greatest player of all time, with a 7-footer and potentially the number 1 pick in this year's NBA draft, I think they could do some things. I really think that they win the bottom half of conferences in the country.
Dude, could you imagine LeBron? That would be like a college player going and playing a bunch of like 5th graders. Just like, especially if you give him, I think recovery wise, LeBron's probably doing all right there. I mean, he's in a college schedule. You're playing half as many, a third, maybe a quarter of the amount of games you're playing in an NBA season. And if you're letting him put $1 million towards his body and recovery like he does every year, like he's probably fine. The other guys are probably struggling a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it would be absurd to watch. It would be like just plowing people over and no one could stop him.
Yeah, the recovery thing, I think it's Ballo too, right? Like Ballo at this point in his career, playing 40 minutes a game for an entire season is going to be really tough. I don't know what you do defensively, how you get him up and down the court for the entirety of a 40-minute game. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just have him sit on the defensive end and he doesn't even come play offense. That's the thing. Maybe I'm almost more in Brian's camp now. You just leave Ballo on defense. Tell him, don't even worry about going down and playing offense. You just sit under the basket, protect the basket, no fast break points, nothing easy, and you just have LeBron and Jalen go to work.
That's the thing. I think you would have to make a rule about because I think to kind of throw a twist in this, it would have to be that teams couldn't watch film or game plan really to play against them. Because if you watch film against a team with only 3 guys, you're going to figure it out defensively the best way to guard that. And obviously, they're still going to score sometimes when you have LeBron and Jalen Suggs and a 7-footer against some of these teams. But you could really just play 4-on-3 on defense and then just have a guy down on the other end of the court cherry picking. And as soon as you get the ball, you just chuck it down to him. You're getting 2 points every however many seconds. So I think maybe you put a fast break rule, where you can't cross half court until someone's there.
I'll tell one funny story that's only semi-related, but I think is hilarious to think about when you talk about LeBron bowling kids over. I was a junior in high school playing in the same club program as my brother, who is 5 years younger than me. So he was in 7th grade probably. So since we played for the same club, we also had the same jerseys. They were reversible jerseys and everything. So one day we happened to have a game on the same day. Went to mine in the morning. I played. We went to his game in the afternoon. I was friends with his coach, and I said to him, "Hey, what do you think about letting me throw my jersey on and going and warming up with Jeremy's team, my little brother?" And the coach was like, "I don't care. You can't play, but if you want to go warm up." Watching that other team, and guys, I am not an amazing basketball player, but I'm decently tall. So watching a junior in high school, no matter how good you are at basketball, to go warm up with a bunch of 7th graders was absolutely hilarious. I went over to the opposing coach after we were just about to tip off, and I finally went and sat down on the bench, threw a sweatshirt on or whatever. And the opposing coach came over and he was like, "I was legitimately about to ask you for a driver's license or a birth certificate," because he's like, "There was no way I was letting my team go up against you." And that's purely what LeBron would be going up against any mid-low major team. There's just no competition physically between those two, between him and those groups of people.
Hey, you find the right AAU team and they'll just put you down as a great exception and move on, and you'll be out there playing.
Now?
Yeah. I am 5.
Yeah,
I'm 12.
right.
I'm 12.
I am 12. A little piece of paper with some crayon on it. Perfect. Okay, we're going to continue down the Omar Ballo hole. Would Omar Ballo win National Player of the Year if he got 70 touches a game? This one's from Jerry Minigan. I'm actually going to defer to whoever put the notes in because I don't want to take your thunder because these notes are absolutely ridiculous. So I'll defer on this one.
For sure. Yeah, I threw these in here. So I wanted to benchmark Omar Ballo against the reigning National Player of the Year, Luka Garza. Luka Garza's usage rate is 33.3%, meaning something along the lines of he touches the ball and makes a play on 33% of Iowa's possessions. Iowa averages around 74.5 possessions per game. So that basically puts 25 possessions in his hands every game. Now, here's the thing. If Ballo got 70 touches, I'm not sure exactly how many times he would shoot, but let's say for the fun of it, let's say he shot every time he touched the ball. He, at this point, is shooting 64.5%, meaning on 70 possessions, he would convert on 45 of them and average 90 points per game. So, if he shoots the ball every time he touches it and maintains his current shooting percentage, which he probably wouldn't, but, for the fun of it, let's say he does, he would average 90 points per game. So, yes, he would win National Player of the Year. Any other thoughts, guys? Or
I'm going to go with a no. It's a no for me, dog. I think there would be a very, very strong regression his shooting percentage would regress significantly. And also if a guy's shooting it or getting touches 70 times per game instead of, I don't even know what he's getting now, probably 10, the attention you get defensively is going to be a lot different. But 70 touches in the game, I don't know what the norm is. But like, yeah, you're still probably going to put up some good numbers. I just can't imagine the efficiency of that is going to be great.
For the record here, Coppin State leads the nation in possessions per game, and they're averaging 80.9 possessions per game. So meaning if we match that, then Omar Ballo would get 70 of our 80 possessions per game. And this year we're averaging 77 a game.
I think if we went back to the other one with Omar, LeBron, and Jalen Suggs on a team, I think LeBron and Jalen might be getting 70 touches per game. And I think LeBron would for sure be National Player of the Year, but different players.
Yeah, 70 touches with his play style. There's not a lot of options for what he can do either. I think if you think about like the Garza comparison, like Garza's got a pretty well-rounded game. As much as I love Ballo, I don't think he has the most well-rounded game at this point, offensively speaking. So 70 touches a game, teams are going to figure out pretty quickly how to not have that be an issue. And I do not think he's getting National Player of the Year. but the numbers theoretically behind it are bonkers. So that's why I wanted to let you go first.
Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, no, the numbers are fun, you know. All right. Next question comes from Ben Myris. How much of an impact does officiating style impact how we run our offense? Like, do we morph our offense around how the games are called, or do we just play our game and let the refs call it how they want? And then there's kind of a part 2 to this question. Similarly, should we worry about getting to the tournament and running into a physical team that may be allowed to play more physical than how we've been playing during WCC play? To answer the first part of the question, I don't really know if we morph how we play. I think our offense, regardless of how the refs are calling the game, is just super efficient. And I think we're so deep that if we have a few guys that get into foul trouble, like that's really not a concern either. So I think for this particular team, I don't think it does impact how we play at all as a team. And to answer the second question, it might be a little bit of a concern. What I wouldn't want is like a replay of the national championship game a few years ago when we had Zach Collins foul out with 5 minutes left and Jonathan Williams and Shemek each with 4 fouls going into the last stretch of the game. That would just be nightmare scenario. Now, obviously, I think that it's arguable which team is deeper, but I think our offensive firepower this year would allow us to do a lot better against a really physical team when the refs aren't maybe calling much. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think for the first part of the question, I think the officiating style probably has little to no effect on how we run our offense. Especially, I think in general, like we talked about it with Tyler when he came on the podcast a few weeks ago, just like in terms of game planning, how Mark Few he's not really super concerned about what the other team's doing. It's more like, what are we doing? And I think that's the same thing that they would say about the refs is just like, they're just focused on what they're doing, especially with a team that's not really running set plays on offense. They're kind of just like read and react, kind of like motion offense, continuity, ball screen, and they're just playing basketball. So no, I mean, maybe like, yeah, someone like Jalen is not going to drive the lane as aggressively if he keeps getting called on like BS charge calls. But I don't think it's changing it that much. In terms of end of the season and running into a physical team, I think we actually are better suited in a more physical game that's letting us play a bit more because we have some physical guys and athletically we're superior to a lot of teams, even some of the major conference teams. Like Jalen Suggs is a freak. Kispert is big for his position where he's playing on the wing. He has good size to him. Watson is, he might seem soft sometimes, but like he's a physical guy. He's a big guy, and obviously Timmy down low. So I think the way that the reffing goes in physical games, like we talked about with West Virginia, is in our favor too. And you can make this argument every year that maybe it disadvantages us going into the tournament because we haven't had a super athletic and physical team that we've played against for a couple months at that point. But like, look at 2017 team, like West Virginia, it might muck it up a bit and be really ugly, but like good teams are going to thrive no matter what the situation is. So I think all in all, especially a team that's this much better than the rest of the country outside of Baylor is going to be fine.
Yeah, I'll make mine quick, as not to repeat as many comments as I can. But do I think officiating impacts how we run our offense? No. Do I think it can impact how aggressive certain players may play? Absolutely. You're not going to just get called for 2 quick fouls and keep playing the same way you've been playing. You're going to be smart about it, and Mark Few is going to get in your ear and not allow you to get in any more foul trouble than that. But I do think he's going to tell the guys, we're still going to play our game. We're not going to adjust the way we're playing as a team. It's an individual thing. I actually would love to see us play a physical team where refs are not calling fouls. I think that's the big piece, right? I don't want to go play a physical team and have it be a whistle happy game. But if they're letting it go, I would love to see, somebody poke the bear with Drew Timme, especially Anton Watson, Corey Kispert, honestly, our entire backcourt defensively. Like, poke those guys, get a little physical, and don't call fouls back. They're going to come back at you pretty damn hard. I don't think this is not a team that's getting intimidated by a physical team come March Madness.
Jalen, if you let him just like go full on, not worried about getting a foul called, like we've seen it a couple of times, he misses an easy layup and he's just like, give me the ball back. Like he'll go take it from somebody and go bump him out of the way. So yeah, I'd love to see that. All right, second to last question we have tonight. If you switched Gonzaga and Baylor's schedule, is Gonzaga still number one? So saying, if Gonzaga played their easy part of the schedule early in the year and Baylor's playing what they're playing now at the beginning of the year. And then a second question there is, does Baylor drop a non-conference game early on? That's from Paul Morrisroe. Am I saying that right, Brian?
Yep, you got it.
Sorry, Paul. So honestly, I think it comes down to, Baylor probably is number one if we switch the schedules, just because I think they get the same thing that Gonzaga got, where they'll get the hype in the early season and then people kind of get some of their, status quo bias, where, they're the number one team until they're not, until they lose. And so I think if Baylor was beating all these top 10, top 15 teams like we were at the beginning of the year, and we were playing, crappy teams, that, they're probably number one. I think if we switched the rankings at the beginning of the year, you could say the same thing. Like, if Baylor was number one and we were number two, I don't really think there's a reason why it would switch at this point. Ideally for me, it's like, right now, I think the rankings should be exactly what they were at the beginning of the year, where it's pretty much evenly split. I don't think either team's any different. And no, I don't think Baylor is dropping a non-conference game early on if they're playing what we played. And I don't think we drop it. I just think both teams are so far ahead of everyone else in college basketball this year that it would take, I think you have a bigger chance of losing at the end of the season or kind of middle of the season, when it's really kind of, you get the lulls of the season going on, but neither team's really showed signs of stopping.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that if you start off Baylor at 1, Gonzaga 2, that's probably where we sit now. Well, actually, I don't know. In that scenario, if we're still playing the same caliber teams we played in non-conference, but maybe not the exact same schedule, I could see us jumping up above them, just from a pure efficiency standpoint. But I don't think Baylor's dropping a non-conference game to any of the teams we've played, and I don't think we're dropping a non-conference game to any of the teams they've played. I think it's going to come out a wash pretty much exactly as it is now.
Yeah, I think Carson, you hit on it. I mean, it'd be biased toward the status quo. If Baylor, if Baylor started out the season as the number one team, or if they had all the wins that we had early on, they would solidify themselves as the toughest team to play in the country. And now I think it's starting to be a really interesting conversation. They're making it super interesting, beating up on teams like Kansas and West Virginia, and who obviously we beat too. But now it's kind of like, look, we can go pound for pound here. So yeah, status quo I think would hold out, and I think just because Baylor would play those tougher games early on, they would solidify themselves as number one. And we would then kind of make the conversation interesting as the season goes on, much like Baylor's doing now.
Yeah, and I do think a few weeks down the road here, if Baylor does get through their conference slate or the rest of their big games unscathed, that they're probably going to be the number one team in the country, and that'll suck to see because we really didn't do anything to lose it. But it's tough to complain. Everyone knows it's 1 and 2, and they probably get the number one overall seed too. And honestly, I don't know if that wouldn't be the case today. Just resume wise, I think they have. I mean, they just have way more opportunities this year, and they've done pretty much the same thing that we have in their games. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to suck, but I mean, at the end of the day, it really just matters that we're on opposite sides of the bracket. I don't think there's a huge difference between the number 3, number 1 seed and the number 4, number 1 seed this year. So.
Yeah, and you said they're 1-2. I know you weren't like in any way saying we were 1 and they were 2 or anything like that, but I know I've heard like it's 1A, 1B, and then the rest of the conference. I think or the rest of the country. I honestly think at this point it's like 1A1 and 1A2, and then the rest of the country. Like I think those two teams are just so far and above most of the rest of the country. They're just untouchable at this point, and barring a loss by both a bad loss by both teams, they're going to finish 1 and 2 this year in AP. Last question. Really tugging at my grinding my gears here, but everyone always says Gonzaga plays nobody. After Houston and Nova both said no, can we switch that up to nobody plays Gonzaga? This is also sent in by Paul Morris Rowe. My immediate answer is no, I am not going to make that argument because I don't want to be SDSU on Twitter and coming out here taking shots at Houston and Gonzaga for literally no reason. I think that is absolutely moronic and way too far. They got way too far into a bit. Yeah, I think in general, though, I do agree. I think it's interesting that we weren't able to get games scheduled. I think with COVID and everything, you just can't possibly know all of the different parts that goes into scheduling a middle of conference, non-conference game and what the logistics are of doing something like that. But I do think you can trend a little bit more towards the idea that nobody wants to play us right now. It's a lot you're signing up for, although Houston maybe might want to call us back and reconsider now that they went ahead and lost to Eastern Carolina.
It's funny. I've got some truth. I've got some truth here that I want to share. And the reason why I say I've got some truth to share is because it comes directly from Twitter. So I tweeted out a couple of days ago when there was talk that we might schedule with Nova, saying Nova and Ohio State are the only top 25 teams that currently do not have a Saturday game scheduled. The game, they're teams that the Zags had not already played and are not on pause due to COVID. And I got a response from @TeamNell, whose profile picture is the Villanova National Championship ring. And @TeamNell said, "I suggest playing OSU, LOL. We don't want the smoke just yet." So if that tells you anything, it tells you that Nova is scared to play Gonzaga. So yeah, teams are scared. Let's just put it that way.
Dude, yeah, honestly, I think a lot of fans of a lot of teams that are actually, good teams, we're going to exclude a San Diego State here because they're not really in that conversation. But like a Villanova or another, top 5, top 10 team this year, like why would you want to go play Gonzaga? I mean, for us, we're like, yeah, like let's get another top 5, top 10 team so we can play. And we're assuming we're going to win that by 10 plus points. And they're probably assuming that they're going to lose by 10 plus points. Like the guy on Twitter, I saw a few Villanova people just being like, yeah, let's let's take care of some of our Big East games first. Like, no one wants to take that loss right now. And obviously both teams ended up going and losing bad games anyways. But yeah, I mean, I think if it was last year when we were the number one team for part of the season and this was the way things were going and we needed to schedule a game, I think we would have gotten a game a lot quicker. And I don't think teams would have been thinking twice about like whether they really wanted to potentially lose a game by 20 plus points. Which you could also make the argument that this year, you know, you're not going to get docked as much for that, but that does a lot to a team to go get like the shit beat out of them for 40 minutes on national television at this point in the season. So
think about that game we've talked about this multiple times, but that Nova game that we had a couple of years ago of like, that's a demoralizing loss when you go out there and you're like, shit, we're really like, we're good, but we're the next level down from these guys. And I don't know that there's many teams in the country that would come out of a loss after running into the buzzsaw of Gonzaga and feel better come March Madness. I think, you know, we play Baylor. It's probably going to be a close game. You lose that game. That's not the end of your, you know, that's not a demoralizer. That's a good loss, right? There's a couple other teams that probably fall in that category. But for everybody else, like, it's just not worth it to put another loss on your record, jeopardize a one seed higher come seeding in March Madness time. So yeah, I think a lot of the teams probably are generally scared to come play us.
Yeah, you bring up the 2018 team. I remember watching that in our shack of a house on Augusta senior year of college and just being like, I mean, we knew that team wasn't great, but, you know, you never know. And by the time the tournament actually came around and the way it shook out, like, we were like, oh, we could make a Final Four run. But, like, after that game, we were just like, oh, okay, we have no chance at a championship this year if Villanova's anywhere close to that. Like, we're just on a completely different level. And, yeah, I mean, obviously for players, I think it's a little bit different. They're probably not going to throw the towel in that quick. But, yeah, I mean, that's pretty tough to – if you go out at this point in the season, because that was early in the season. If you come out in February or even later in February and lose by 15, 20 points, that's not great momentum and morale-wise going into your conference tournament and the NCAA tournament.
Right. And especially you got two teams that are kind of on the cusp trying to solidify the third or fourth number one seed. And yeah, losing to Gonzaga is not a bad loss. It's probably the safest loss in the country, us and Baylor, obviously, but it's another L and you know, it's another loss in the loss column, and that could play a factor at the end of the day. But yeah, what's funny is, you know, Houston might have been real worried about, you know, locking in that number one seed, but after losing to East Carolina, yikes. You know, we'll see what happens.
Villanova now too. Lenardi had dropped them down to, they're like the third number 2 seed now. So, I mean, we talk about, oh, you know, at this point you lose, obviously those were bad losses, but like, oh, you lose a game to Gonzaga or Baylor, it won't drop you down a seed line, or else, you know, like you don't deserve it. But it's like, it could at this point in the year when if you lose a game on the same day that the 2 teams nearby you or 3 teams back of you gets a good win, like, that sure as hell could drop you a seed line, especially this late into the season when we know the tournament committee has a little bit of a recency bias and an availability bias, and so do the people that are doing the rankings, which, you know, they shouldn't have a part in what like the tournament selection committee does, but it does seem to kind of paint that picture for them going into it. So, yeah, I mean, I get it, but it sucks. It's still not a great look.
So yeah, nobody plays Gonzaga.
It's the curse of the Zags. Everyone that ducks us is going to go lose to the East Carolinas of the world.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Zag Talk. We really enjoyed answering your guys' questions. Feel free to continue to respond to our tweets, DM us on Twitter, text us if you're our friends. If you're not our friends, I guess if you have our numbers, you can also text us questions. I don't really mind. We love talking Zags. This is a super fun, interesting conversation, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Go Zags.
Go Zags.